So good afternoon,
Cool.
Rachel. Today we have Rachel Whitefield. Am I pronouncing it right?
Whitfield, but everyone does that, so it's fine.
And she's from Bristol, England, and she joined us to talk about her fascinating healing process from long COVID. And also she in her past, she also healed from scuba diving injury, which is called compression sickness. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's cool.
So Rachel, let's delve, without further ado, let's delve into it. How it all started with the long COVID issue.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting because I've done quite a lot of research now, both whilst I was attempting to heal, whilst I was ill, but also then I've spent the last 6 months, having been well, researching further to try and help other people. And so I think in order to understand, for me, long COVID and a lot of other people, you sort of have to go back before COVID, before the pandemic. And for me, that meant that my life was very busy. I'm a single parent. I think I thought I was Superwoman. And so I was very, I was working in London, but living in Bristol, commuting a lot, very cognitively overloaded, quite a stressful job. Yes. Also training for a marathon and doing a lot of activity. And so I literally crammed my life in. And I thought that was great. But actually, having spoken to people since, a lot of people said, we wondered when you would burn out. And they've kind of, that's come out in the last few months. So what I think happened to me was that it wasn't just about COVID. I think COVID was a final kind of straw, but if you think of your body as a kind of a bucket that you can put so much stress in, whether that's physical or mental or emotional, I think my bucket was pretty full anyway, and I was just about surviving and quite enjoying that, but it was definitely full. There wasn't a lot of extra capacity. And I think for me, what happened with COVID is I got COVID. It was fairly mild. I thought I'd got away with it.
When did you get it? When was that?
So I got it in the end of 2020, beginning of December 2020. Got it from my daughter, who got it from her dad, who got it from his lodger. You know, you can see that. So fairly mild. Some brain fog for a few days. Felt quite tired. Couldn't really think straight. But I'd liken it to flu. You know, and I think that was kind of interesting, because when I got out after the 10 days of the isolation, and this is a really typical story, there's two types of long haulers. There's those that have been in hospital, that are really ill, that presumably had some potentially physical damage, and then there's those that were actually had it quite mildly to begin with, and then either recovered for a bit or maybe didn't recover, and then kind of kept kind of relapsing, which is what happened to me. So I actually went back out into the outside world, tried to pick up training, felt great, went running for a few days, kind of went back to normal. It was Christmas time, I think, so I drank a bit, ate a bit, ran a bit, generally ran around a lot. And then the beginning of January, I just crashed. I couldn't think straight. I didn't know what on earth was going on. It was really frightening, and the symptoms were worse than the first time. And I see this a lot. I see some trends, lots of trends in the groups of people that are fairly, I think I'm quite an emotional person. I'm quite sensitive, that have been very busy, multitaskers, a lot of women, actually, a lot of athletes. And then COVID happened, and then they've tried to get back, and you know, back into stressful life, and something's just toppled. So I had a series of crashes where I'd then kind of come back and be okay for a few days, and then just couldn't seem to function.
So what were the symptoms? What did you feel?
Sure. Like awful brain fog where I just couldn't think straight. Fatigue like I have never known, not just tiredness, but I can't even really describe it, but kind of like the worst flu, I suppose, flu-y symptoms, but just where all you want to do is just sleep. And I somehow managed to do a 2-hour Zoom call in this state, and I don't know how I did it. And then I was kind of going to sleep in between. I had the symptoms were not all at the same time. They would come and go and change and shift. And again, that's really common with long COVID, because it's a neurological, it stems from your nervous system in complete disarray, and the nervous system is responsible for everything. So I had COVID toes, I had a burning back, I had pins and needles, my throat felt like someone was literally strangling it. I couldn't regulate temperature. My hands and feet would feel like ice blocks. I slept.
The extremities were cold.
The extremities were just freezing, even if the heating was on. I had to put my feet in a really hot bath just to try and warm them up. I can't even remember all the symptoms. At one point I went grey. I remember looking in the mirror, I was grey. I remember my ribs, I couldn't wear a bra because my ribs hurt so much.
So you had kind of chronic pain too?
So there was pain, yeah. I mean, the back burning was pretty unpleasant. The throat felt chronic pain, headaches at different times, but not all the time. The symptoms would come and go, and they'd get better for a bit and then worse when I was in a crash, and then I'd kind of come out, and some of them would start to disappear and then they'd come back. And every time I felt better, I tried to get back to normal life, and then every time I crashed, I felt worse. And in the end, I stopped even having this boom and bust cycle. It was just bust. At the absolute worst, mid-February.
How long did it last, this?
So I think I diarised it. I actually started a diary in December, and I diarised everything up until July last year. And so each crash would last, I don't know, sometimes 10 days, sometimes less. As I started to heal, I realised that they were getting less. So that was positive. And when you talk about mindset, being able to tell myself that it wasn't a linear journey, but I was that the dips were less.
Oscillate, but the fluctuations are
yeah, I think they call it centric circles or something, where it's not linear, but you can start to notice evidence of things lessening.
So it was around 7 months, or these symptoms coming and going, and they were harsh because part of the time you were bedridden because of tiredness.
Yes, and then there was a point where it changed, where mid-February I suddenly got insomnia, and so I didn't really sleep very well at all for several months. I became obsessed. Some nights I didn't sleep at all. Some nights I started taking sleeping tablets. So some nights I slept, but the tablets didn't work that well.
Which modalities did you use that didn't work for you? What did you try to do for this?
In terms of medication, or
anything that you tried to take yourself out of these symptoms.
So initially I had no idea what was going on at all, and at my absolute worst I kept trying to rest, but my idea of rest was still working from bed. So I'm self-employed, so I was determined to hang on to work, and that was quite interesting, because the first couple of times I continued to exercise when I felt better, and that clearly wasn't working. So I stopped exercising, and then still continued to crash, and then I stopped moving and ended up in bed and still continued to crash. And then I realized that stress wasn't just physical. Actually, my entire nervous system was somehow overloaded, and actually the biggest problem was emotional stress or pressure that I was putting under myself to try and get better for work. So the first thing I did, I think, was I gave up work for 2 weeks, and I started to feel a bit better, but then as it came closer to the deadline of going back to work, I crashed. And that's when I realized, then I cancelled work again and felt better. Then as it got closer, I crashed again, and that's when I realized. I made a joke to my mum. This was a one of the turning points. I made a joke to my mum where I said, isn't it funny how it's a bit like going to the doctors, where when you get to the doctor, the cough's gone. And I said, isn't it funny, every time I cancel work, as soon as I've made that phone call, I feel better. Why is that? That's just weird. And then it just clicked, and I went, stress, emotional, cognitive stress, which actually is an example of fear. Fear, the pressure you put on yourself.
Actually, whenever you were just contemplating about work, then you crashed?
Yeah.
You know what? You remind me someone who have been interviewed here. He suffered of carpal tunnel syndrome, but very severe one, from the neck till the finger. This whole channel was inflamed and painful for 7 years.
Yeah.
And he even had surgeries.
Yeah.
And he told me that just by thinking about holding the mouse, just the thought of it started the pain. So it reminded me what.
Yeah.
And there was another lady, she was allergic to almost everything, you know, because when you start the cycle, you become very reactive when things deteriorate, and it's like you desensitize yourself. So it reached to a point that when she was thinking of what, she started to develop the reactions.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that my partner noticed it. So I was working from bed, and I think I cancelled work for the week, but I'm self-employed, so I was half sleeping, half trying to plan for the following week. And he said he noticed as the week went on, he could see the stress, he could see my physiology. So I didn't notice it, but he'd been noticing it from a distance. And I said, oh no, don't be ridiculous. But it was true, you know, the pressure of needing to be well that I was putting on myself was actually starting to drive some of the crashes. And I don't know at what point. So I've got a view on long COVID is that it's an illness of two parts. Part of it is about the fact that when you first get this pain and these symptoms, is your body saying stop and sending you messages of safety.
Yes.
But there's a point where that stops, and there's a point where it starts to actually be a bit of a conditioned response, where then every time you try and do the activity that hurt you in the first place, you're in this pattern, and you start to fear the activity, and that very fear starts to create these loops.
Because it is lasting so much time, there is another layer to the problem, because you anticipate body, and we are complex creatures.
Exactly. And the other thing that was interesting is eventually I work as a performer. I train people, and I mostly work on Zoom, but there's quite a lot of pressure because you've got lots of people that you're trying to facilitate. And you know, so it's quite a stressful job that I wasn't able to do in that state. And so then there was another piece where I thought, okay, I need to just quit work. But then I kept saying to myself, what if I get better? I don't want to quit work. I've worked so hard. And I was almost having this argument in my brain where in the end, the decision didn't matter. But the debate that I was having in my brain of trying to make this decision was creating this exhaustion. And so when I finally made the decision that my health was actually more important, and I made the phone calls, and actually one of my clients, I made the phone call and said, I think I need to take a month off. And they went, do you know what? Have two. Which was amazing.
Can you pinpoint exactly what was the time of when the needle shifted towards the right direction?
Yeah. So towards the end of February, I was in such a state that I hadn't left the house for days, and I was trying to decide whether to stop work or not. And I think I made the phone call right at the beginning of March. I'd been cancelling work for the last month, but in piecemeal amounts. So I made the phone call and I just said, I'm going to take the whole of March off. And immediately, and I made the phone call to various clients who were all amazing, who you know, didn't have the response that I thought. I realized how much pressure I'd put on myself. So just making that phone call and deciding to take some proper time out to de-stress. So have nothing that I had to do. in that month was huge. I think that was a turning point. I nearly went down the line of elimination diet. So there'd been this thing about if you didn't eat food that was histamine, high in histamine, that was a good thing. And I didn't, because I got really confused. And some of the foods I really like.
Sometimes doing these diets
It's
are
not a good
very
idea.
stressful also you are starting to be afraid of food. Like,
yeah. And I've seen that I've hung around a lot of the long COVID groups, and I've seen that the most ill people are the people that are on these low histamine diets. And I think that a lot of them are saying that they wish they'd never started, because you start setting up associations with certain foods. And the reality is you can't absolutely know what's made you crash. And so one of the best advice is not to look for, oh, I did that thing, and therefore it must have been that, because then you start setting up more fear cycles. So I didn't do that. I just ate quite healthily, a rainbow diet.
How actually you healed, Rachel?
Yeah, so I decided to take a month off, and that was the start of the healing process. And just by having no stress, nothing that I had to do, that made a difference. But also, I think it's a real fine balance, because I still had a bit of a structure, because I'm a single parent. So I asked for help. I got my friends to take my daughter to school. I gave up work for a month. So I had nothing much to do other than I had to get up just to get her dressed in order for her to then go to school for the day. And I think actually that was really good, because I still had a bit of a structure. So I didn't completely retire to bed. I was still getting up every morning, going downstairs, making her breakfast. Then I had the whole day to de-stress and recuperate. But then in the evenings, I still had to cook for her. And to begin with, that was Deliveroo.
But what did you do all day? Now, look, I am asking this question from a state of mind of a doer, because we have like this, the doing, adjusting your body with doing, and we connect our self-worth with doing. And so,
what did I do? Yeah.
Yes, at this month of March, when you decided to give it to yourself, and
so what I did firstly was that I told myself that I would recover, and that when I recovered, I would help other people. So I had a really clear purpose that I was going to use all the skills that I had to learn about this illness, to understand it. And I think I was lucky. The first thing that I listened to was some audio files by a guy called Ashok Gupta. And it's some brain retraining. And he talks about the condition. And he talked about the fact that the condition would have started with a virus, but then after a period of time, your brain kind of just carries on in high alert. So the symptoms when you have a virus are because your body's in fight or flight. It's attacking the virus. But when the virus goes, for some people, the nervous system remains in the parasympathetic side in fight or flight. And he explained that that's what had happened to me.
The sympathetic, not the parasympathetic.
Sorry, the sympathetic nervous side. I know I always get that muddled up the wrong way.
It's the alert, vigilant.
Yeah, exactly. And so just by understanding that was what was happening, and it wasn't anything that was biomedical, it wasn't blood clots that I'd read about, it wasn't lung damage that had given me shortness of breath. You know, I got blood tests and they all came back clear. So I think I took the fear out, because I started to understand that I was in high alert mode, I was in fear mode, and if I could get myself out of fear modes and I could try and engage the parasympathetic side of my nervous system, then I would start to come out. And so I noticed, as I was listening to his explanation, some of the fatigue shifted just by starting to understand that was the case.
But is it just enough to understand,
No.
to witness it? Because you know, people with anxiety who have a tendency to be constantly, and especially people with traumas from childhood, people whose brain is wired to be in fight freeze mode.
Yeah.
How would you even access this frightful brain and educate it or train it to let go of the fear?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? And it's hard because as I'm trying to go through this, some of it's kind of very subjective experience. Definitely for me, understanding that there was nothing physically permanently wrong with me definitely made a difference, because a lot of the fear was, what if I'm permanently damaged? What if I never get my old life back? Like the darkest note was when I would wake up just going, I want my old life back. And I'd ring my mum and go, just want my old life back. And she would go, you can't have your old life back. This is here and now. You've got to move forward. So while I researched and I looked at, okay, what were the things that I could do that would help in terms of the rest and repair? And everything I did was about, how do I get myself into rest and repair? So I meditated. I have never meditated before, but I found some meditations that worked for me. And two that I played again and again. And that I think those helped. I saw a breathing physio, and she explained to me that I was rapidly breathing. I was breathing at 24 breaths a minute, so I was almost hyperventilating. I was breathing very shallowly, and I was mouth breathing. And so just from a physical point of view, she gave me some exercises that I could do. So I experimented with belly breathing, proper, diaphragmatic breathing. There's a great website called Stasis Life, and they have lots of exercises. They're Mount Sinai, they're in New York. They've been doing a lot of work with people with long COVID. So that was something very definite, very physical that I could do that would help in terms of the feelings of anxiety and start to pull
you
me.
were doing conscious breathing with an intention to lower the frequency of not to be an overbreather and
exactly. And I think I was an overbreather before COVID. I think that made me more susceptible. I think a lot of
you know the Bouteco method.
What's it called?
It's called the Bouteco method. He was a Russian physician or engineer or both of them, and he discovered something about that, most people, especially anxious people, they overbreathe.
Yeah.
And because of that, they don't have enough CO2 in the blood.
Yes, exactly. Exactly that, which then causes a shortness of breath, because you're not getting the CO2 is what is the trigger to breathe, isn't it? So a lot of people with long COVID that think that their lungs are damaged might want to check out whether actually they're just over breathing. And it could be
about, like any chronic condition.
Yeah.
Sufferer is obsessing about his condition, and he's constantly checking.
Yeah, exactly. And once you constantly check, that was another thing that I did, that once I understood that everything was generated from the nervous system, I stopped looking for individual symptoms. I stopped worrying about them. I stopped talking about them, because I realized that the symptoms didn't matter. And because I listened to another lady called Nicole Sachs, who talks a lot about chronic pain. She contacted me last week to see if she could share my story. I'm so excited.
She's doing the Dr. Sarno method.
Yes, the Sarno method, yes. So I listened to a lot of her podcasts, and there were 3 in particular that again were just turning points, where she talked about relapses and how, you know, what will happen is you'll feel a symptom and your brain will then get frightened about the symptom, and the actual crash is quite often not to do with the original symptom. It's the fact that you're worrying about it and obsessing about it.
During that month, you ignored you tried to ignore the symptoms, you tried to overlook them, to just focus on your work, like breathing, meditation.
I bought I happened to buy a hot tub, just a blow up hot tub, for my daughter's birthday, and she's only 8, and she used it once. I used it every day for a month. So I sat in my garden because someone said that vitamin D was a good thing. It was March, but I sat in the hot tub, and I started to, someone said, if you can find some new enjoyment in it, if you can, instead of grieving your old life or just accepting it, because that's sort of almost resignation, if you can find the learning from it, if you can find the gift, which is really hard when you're in a complete mess, but if you can find something positive and actually genuinely relish that time, because it's just a phase, like all of these things that happen to us, they're not necessarily permanent, they're just phases. And so I've always loved reading, and I've never had the opportunity. And even when I was exhausted, I discovered audiobooks. And so I just decided that this was going to be a different time. This was going to be an opportunity. And so I think my mindset was very much just, this is an opportunity. Everything I'm going to do is about learning and about finding the parasympathetic side. And so I am getting healthier, not just for healing non-COVID, but as a general life mission. So I discovered yoga. I discovered a yoga group specifically for people with long COVID. So it was set up and structured so that you just, to begin with, moved your leg, you know, or an arm, and you were lying down. And then gradually every week, so I joined them 3 times a week, and every week I would do just a little bit more and tell myself I was safe, and everyone else also had long COVID and they were starting to get better. And my diary was showing that I was starting just to make some shifts. And so that was important then, to keep looking at my diary and showing myself that not every day, but within the weeks, that there was a noticeable difference, that I was starting to get better. I was starting to be able to actually cook a simple meal for my daughter rather than just have things delivered. You know, I by the end of March, I was able to have a conversation for an hour with a friend.
So
whereas I hadn't been able
when
to,
you're talking about the brain fog and that you were able, the problem was that you couldn't focus. Did you find difficulties with memory?
So for some reason, and I don't know why, I had the brain fog early on and it lifted. And I think it lifted at the point where I understood what was going on with the illness. And because I think then the fear, I took the fear out of it. And I think the brain fog is just another symptom of stress. I get it now sometimes, even though I'm well. When I'm very, very stressed, my brain feels a bit foggier. So I think just taking the fear out and realizing that it was possible to heal. I had a friend, this is important, I had a friend that I'd never met, but a friend of a friend who'd healed. And she sent me a text saying, Rachel, I want you to know that it will take some time, but I healed and I'm now running again. And so I also had this knowledge that it wasn't incurable. They told me it was incurable, but it couldn't be. And then I realized that the common cold is incurable, but people heal from it.
Exactly. The common cold is forever.
Exactly. And, so for some reason, the brain fog wasn't as much of a problem for me. And I think the other thing is I continued reading, and because I didn't completely stop everything, I think that helped. So I think there's a real balance between rest and too much rest.
Can I
Too
ask
much.
you something? this month that you took to yourself, which seems to be the turning point in your healing journey, as a very striving, achieving, responsible human being, and I see all these traits in you in a very positive way, but they take a toll, as you see.
Yeah.
During this month, did you sense, when you sensed the insidious, undeserved guilt coming, that I am doing nothing, that I am just sitting, just moving around without being productive, we have this super ego, the tyranny of the super ego, which is, it's the inner self-talk that is disguising as the good guy who wants to protect us. What was your reaction? I mean, for many people who are like us, I'm like you, this is, it takes one to know one. For people like us that are, that our brains is wired to be in the doing state of mind. And suddenly, this month of radical rest comes, we feel unease. And you know what? You reminds me something of Eckhart Tolle, that he says that there are two types of suffering. One suffering is to end the suffering, like you have been doing, and there is another type, suffering, which lingers the suffering. So you found, I am sure you found yourself with unease, at least at the beginning of the month, that you were actually, you were doing, but you were not doing the thing that your brain could see, perceive as real doing. How did you deal with this dissonance of, I'm curious to learn from your experience, how did you really completely give yourself this month of non-doing without guilt, without the big G?
Well, exactly. I think, do you know what? I read a book that, because you're right, at the beginning, I said, what am I going to do? I've never taken this sort of time off. What am I going to do? And I read this book very early on by a lady called Catherine May, and it's called The Wintering. And it's brilliant, and a lot of people in my long COVID group read it, and it just had this profound effect where she was ill and then she got better, and she just talked about phases of our lives. And actually, you sort of think, oh, well, when I get better, I'll do. But the reality is, when you get better, there'll be something else that comes along to haunt you. And I realized then that actually I was missing the point of life. I think I just had a really big lesson, and the lesson was that I probably hadn't enjoyed my life as much as I thought. It's actually quite stressful being on the go the whole time, and I started to just realize that life wasn't about that. I also listened to Eckhart Tolle I just realized that actually I think I've been missing the points.
So this is why the insomnia, because you are rushing to go to the next day. How can you sleep when you are always anticipating what you should do in the next moment? And
well, exactly. And the insomnia thing was interesting because for ages I convinced myself, if I can sleep, I'll get better. If I can sleep, I'll get better. And then I realized that my desire to try to sleep was actually creating the insomnia. And so I just gave up. I just decided that it didn't really matter if I slept or not. As long as I lay there, I would probably get enough rest. I probably didn't need as much as I thought. And just by having that mindful acceptance, guess what? I started sleeping more. So I think I reasoned with myself that this was just a different opportunity to learn. And my job is all about learning, and therefore I was going to take the gifts of learning and take the opportunity that I was maybe never going to have again to actually just do something different and to convalesce. Someone said that in the olden days, when people were ill, they used to go to these hotels and convalesce by the seaside. And so I
Yes.
just decided that the seaside was my house and I was going to sit in my garden and I was going to read and learn and take this as a gift.
Amazing. So just to summarize it, when you felt at least at the beginning, the unease of allowing yourself to rest.
Yeah.
What was your inner self? What did you tell yourself when the guilt started to crawl?
Sure. I mean, I think to begin with, it was very much why me? And there was a lot of anger, and I was angry at the world, the politicians, my daughter's dad for giving it to us. I was angry at my boyfriend because he was still able to work and operate as normal. I was angry at people that I could see running down my street. So there was a lot of anger. I had a coach who's now become a friend who had also had long COVID and was further ahead than me. And she constantly was saying, you've got to find a place of acceptance, because then you can move on from that. But whilst you're looking back and trying to grab your old life, you're stuck. And I remember after 4 weeks.
It doesn't make sense to intend to go forward and constantly look.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the 4 weeks, she said, I was going to suggest that we had another month, but you don't need it, because I said, you know what, I've got it, I understand it, there's a gift here, you know. I'm almost glad that I had COVID, because if it wasn't COVID, I'd have burnt out in some other way, maybe in 10 years time, you know. And maybe it's a gift that I'm going to start actually living my life differently, spending more time with my little girl, you know, spending more time reading, less time trying to achieve. And she said, you don't need me anymore.
So it's like you accepted this month as a gift.
Yeah.
Yourself, which helped you to really practice. And did you practice diligently, like the meditation, the breathing, I don't like the word positive thinking, but you know, you practiced rest in a very diligent way.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's a guy that I've just discovered called Alan Gordon.
Yeah.
He's sort of part of Sano, but maybe a more modern version. And I really like him. But I listened to a podcast the other day, and he was talking about how you can try too hard. And so what you get is these people that were schedulers and perfectionists, that then when they're trying to do this thing to heal, they start setting timers for when to meditate. And actually, they haven't changed at all. They're still trying to schedule in how to do things and doing things perfectly. And I think one of the things that helped me was that I didn't do that. I kind of got up in the morning, I'd take my supplements, which I don't think helped. I'd have a smoothie. I'd get my daughter ready. At some point, I would just be sat in the pool. I'd think, oh, I'll practice a bit of breathing. And then I'd maybe read for a bit. And I often had one phone call at some point that I'd scheduled just to keep my hand in. And then I'd maybe go for a walk, but only if I felt like it. And there was no pressure. So I've seen people that have gone, this week I'll do 2,000 steps, next week 3,000, next week 4,000. And you can see where it's going, because there's just this pressure. And I didn't have that. It was much more just intuitively, I'll be going in the right direction in my own time, but I'm not attached to the outcome.
Oh, you're very right. It's the same mentality that brought you to the place that you are stuck now, but the object is different, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, I don't want you to talk only to long COVID holders, but to anyone with a chronic condition, because most chronic conditions are at least the base floor is being stuck in this sympathetic branch of fight, flight, and food. What do you tell a person with a chronic pain or with a chronic condition or with long COVID holders, long COVID symptoms?
Yeah, and I think you're right, because there's certainly some huge similarities between long COVID and ME and chronic fatigue and chronic pain. Most of my learning came out of the chronic pain world. because it's more well documented. I think it seems to be more accessible. I think the biggest thing for me was understanding that there were potentially two parts of the illness. And so whether it's chronic pain or, fatigue or whatever, there'll be something that got you into it. Let's say you break your ankle. It hurts because the signal is danger. Stop doing what you're doing. But then there's another stage where things have healed, but actually your brain is in a cycle of fear, and that fear, particularly if you're in a stressed environment anyway, because that's fear. If you're in a fearful environment.
By the way, it is like a prophecy that actualizes itself, because because then other symptoms appear, and then you think, well, I was right, I'm a mess.
Exactly. And then you go to the doctor, and if you have a scan, I'm convinced that eventually, if you dig deep enough, you will find something that's wrong, or something that probably was there anyway. We all have inflammation. It's a sign of, unless you're a baby, you will have inflammation.
By the way, did you have high levels of inflammation at that time? Did you check?
I went to the doctors and they told me that my blood tests were normal. I didn't dig any deeper. I suspect that if I'd have gone to some sort of functional doctor, if I'd have paid extra, I'm sure they will have found something. I'm glad I didn't, because I think that the harder you deep, you then say to yourself, that's what it is. And then you're into the biomedical routes of waiting to have surgery, or for someone to treat you, or for them to create a cure.
Yeah, sometimes to ignore and be a little bit indifferent.
Yeah.
No, ignorance is a bliss. Sometimes.
Exactly. I mean, you could argue it the other way, but
in this case at least, when you don't obsess and learn too much about your symptoms. Can I ask you, so what would be the advice you would give to a chronic sufferer, a chronic condition sufferer who is in despair now, and he doesn't? What would you tell him?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always two types of people. There's people that believe that there is a mind-body connection, and that doesn't mean that it's your fault, and it doesn't mean that you're being gaslit, and it doesn't mean that the symptoms aren't real. I had purple toes that were incredibly painful, incredibly inflamed. There's no getting away from the fact that that was physical. But I think the stress of what was happening, which includes kind of, what thoughts and what I was reading, all of that links into what happens physically and locks you into the cycle. So I would say, be open to the fact that there isn't this separate mind and body, that what you think, what you do, the fear, the environment that you're in, all of these things, the pressure you put on yourself, make a huge difference. Whereas if you're focused on what's wrong with me from a kind of biochemical point of view, by the way, I'm a biochemist, so I went down that route. It didn't help me. I actually started realizing my symptoms were worse the more I read about it. I would be open to the fact that it's not your fault. And it's not like you're making things up, and it's not just anxiety, but your nervous system controls everything. And once you're stuck, things like anxiety actually do start to play a part. And if you can get a handle on your thoughts, and that includes kind of the anxiety, and start to slow everything down, that starts to make a difference. And all you're looking for to begin with is just tiny changes, because then you can tell yourself that you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. So what is because as you said, the autonomous nervous system is running the show, but it is unconscious. And so what is, in your opinion, the master key to access these hidden parts that are playing with us like puppets?
Yeah. Sorry.
How would you access this unconscious mechanism in the nervous system?
I think for me, and I think this is where I got from the lightning process. So I'd managed to heal myself quite a bit, but what was stopping me was the fact that I'd been told by experts that I was allergic to exercise, that I was exercise intolerant, and if I ran, I would crash. Even if I walked more than a mile, I would crash. If I cycled, I would crash. And so every time I tried, I would crash. And so I set up this cycle where I started to assume that it was the running that was making me crash. And the lightning process introduced the idea that perhaps it was my fear of and my expectation of a certain event that was actually driving it. And so I unpicked the fact that the first symptom I would feel when I tried anything was anxiety, and then backburn, and then throat. And so you can't, if you fear something, you have to do it, because otherwise you get stuck. So it is about slowly introducing the thing that you think is going to hurt you, but reassuring yourself that you're safe and that you know what it is, and doing it slowly.
Is it like exposure or desynthesizing ourselves of the...
Yeah, but you've got to do it in a way that you feel safe and you feel like you really understand it and you believe that you know what's going on. So if I go out and run and I believe that it's going to hurt me, that's probably not great. But if I've reached an understanding that actually I've set up this pattern and it's actually my fear of overdoing it that's going to cause it, then if I expose myself and I get some symptoms because I'm expecting them and I'm looking for them, but I can recognize those symptoms and tell myself that I'm safe and talk myself down, which is what I ended up doing. Then once you've done that once, you've started to set some evidence for how this new belief could be true. So in the end, it's about beliefs and understanding that beliefs are how you see the world, and how experts see the world and how everyone else sees the world, but they may or may not be true. And so I guess it's being open to, there may be a possibility that something you believe that you've felt may actually not be the real truth. I think that's where I ended up, was that I had to completely change my beliefs about the whole illness.
So you mentioned before a book that impacted you. Can you repeat it, because I didn't catch it? Which book do you recommend?
I've read lots. So for a general how to live your life, something like Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, I thought was brilliant. To understand more in terms of chronic conditions and how the mind plays a part, and stress, The Intelligent Body by Kyle Davies. I thought that was very good.
Why did you like it?
Because he explains very pragmatically how we get into these conditions and how stress plays a part, and how, whilst we can't necessarily control what emotional stresses come to us, we can control our reactions. And he gives some ideas in terms of how do you do that. So I thought his book was really good. I actually really like Alan Gordon's The Way Out, and it's more about chronic pain.
I know the book, yes.
But he's brilliant, the way he explains it.
He's a very nice person too, yeah.
Have you met him or spoken to him?
No, but when I see him, and I have been speaking to people in his center who are trainers like him, there is good vibes there.
I actually emailed him the other day and said, I love your book. It's everything pragmatically, that, you know, from how a chronic condition starts to what keeps us stuck, to how, you know, very slowly how you can start to do something different.
Yeah, and he has also a program.
Yeah.
I think 21 days or something and it is based according this book, The Way Out, by
Yes. And there's a podcast actually, and he just comes across as someone I would want as my therapist, but he's been through it too. So he talks about his own journey of fatigue and his own journey of having various chronic pains over the years. And I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, so I during this conversation, I wrote several points that you mentioned, which I thought they worth elaborating on them more. So you talked a lot. I think one of the key word was rest, complete rest, total rest, and and you mentioned also the sleep versus rest. People can sleep but not to get up.
So I thought when I took that month off, I actually thought the rest was doing absolutely nothing. And there was a common theme on a lot of the long COVID groups that you should rest and do absolutely nothing, lie in a dark room, essentially. And I didn't do that. And I'm glad I didn't, because I've changed my mind. And I think that it's a balancing act. If you do too little, it's really hard to get back up. And actually it's about stress, not rest per se. So it's taking out all the have tos, all the must dos, all the cortisol, adrenaline, but it's not doing absolutely nothing. It's just that I didn't have to do anything. So I'd go for a walk and listen to some calming music, and I'd still go out. So I didn't get very far, but I did enough that I wasn't in my bed, which I see some people.
So in a deeper level, because you mentioned that, rest is a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
You say it's not just physical. So in your eyes, what is the ultimate definition for a pure, full, total, radical rest? What is it to be restful?
It's a really hard question, isn't it? It's a really interesting question, because you're right, because I used to lie in bed trying to sleep. That's not rest, because I was fighting to try and sleep. When I started just giving up, that was just rest. When I just lay there, not thinking really of much, but just letting my thoughts go, but not really judging them or thinking about them or worrying about them, I think that was more rest. I don't know the answer, actually. I mean, I tried to do mindfulness, and I went on a mindfulness course. I'm not sure how good I was at that.
Maybe we can reframe the question. When, even if it is for tiny periods of time, when do you feel that you are rested, that you are in this expansion, warmth, sense in the body, if you can reach it? When is
so for me, one of the things that I did at the end of March, beginning of April, was that I actually decided to do a tiny bit of work. I decided to phase myself in, and I did 2 hours to begin with. That was it. But what someone had told me that was really good was to punctuate that time with just a minute of just closing your eyes and doing some breathing. And I think they call it empty brain rest. And I found that more useful than anything else. And I ended up being able to do a day's work, not every day, but by the end of April, I managed to do a day's work. But I only managed to do that, I think, by just every hour, I would shut my eyes for a couple of minutes. And it's almost like taking away the overwhelm and just breathe. And I found that very helpful to be able to do.
Can you say more about the empty brain? I liked already the how you coined it, empty brain rest. What does it mean? It's like you are downloading.
I mean, I guess it's mindfulness, isn't it, really? But I think I gave myself a breathing exercise, because otherwise my brain just wanders. So actually for me, I found that just by having enough cognition to just be counting my breaths meant that I wasn't then thinking of anything else, and I was giving myself the gift. There's something about giving yourself the gift of a few minutes of not having to achieve every hour, that tells yourself that you're safe, that you're worth it, that you matter. And I think that helped hugely.
Yeah, I understand. It's from the bottom up. Like you are, by practicing it, you are training the brain, you are reprogramming the brain that, so can you say something about how do you now cultivate a sense of safety in your life?
Yeah. Well, do you know what's interesting is that old habits die hard. So, so at Christmas time, I realized that having been well for 6 months, I was actually a little bit burnt out. And over Christmas, I started realizing that I was actually exhausted. And I think what's interesting about having had a chronic condition is that for me, I'm still having to learn that being tired is okay. Because as soon as I feel tired, I can feel my brain going into anxiety mode of, oh no, what if it happens again? So I'm not really answering the question, but how do I cultivate a sense of safety? I think is having to revisit these things that you've learned.
Okay. Yeah, and they work, especially that they worked for you.
Yes, yes.
And
yeah, so I had a conversation about a month ago with my mum where I went, oh, I feel a bit anxious, I've been feeling a bit tired, and she went, what did you learn in April last year? And I went, oh yes, actually over time the yoga's disappeared.
so tell me,
Empty brains disappeared,
what you're saying just now, after you have been through this journey and the ups and downs and the crashes and the ups and the relapses, what have you learned? What have changed in your relationship to pain, to chronic condition, to this doom and gloom situations that your body is not, you are not controlling your body? What has changed in your relationship?
Yeah.
God forbid, if sometime you will have an issue.
Yeah.
How would it be different after you have been through this journey?
Such a great question, because I think you do have to keep yourself in check. One of the things that I've definitely noticed is that I don't think I was very good at dealing with emotional stress before COVID, and I've got better, I think, at not reacting to things and realizing that there is a choice, and what someone says to me, I don't need to react to that. That's about them, not me. So I've got much better, I'm not perfect, got much better at recognizing where there's a trigger and choosing to either sidestep it or not react to it, or taking some time to think about it rather than reacting in the moment. That's definitely helped. I also noticed that I still have anxiety sometimes, but I've realized that it's just a feeling and it can't hurt me, but there's no point trying to get rid of it, because if I try too hard to get rid of it, I'm thinking about it, and then what you think about, you carry on getting. So I've now learned to notice that I'm anxious and sit with it and be okay with that, and talk to my family if I need to about that, and know that it will pass. And know that it will pass,
This is a very naive question, but I will ask it nevertheless, because naivety is correlated with innocence and with being open.
Yeah.
Do you believe, after your experience, and you are also an NLP trainer, do you believe that any malady or any chronic condition to some degree can be healed?
Yes, with a caveat that the person that has the chronic condition, they need to believe, or at least be open to the possibility of believing. Because without that belief, everything stems from that belief. So from very early on, I believed that I would heal myself, I would find a way. But yeah, if you don't have that belief, or you're looking for someone else to cure you, it has to come from within. But ultimately, I don't know, I've observed a lot, and I've observed a lot of my friends, and I've observed my friends who have had backache for years, and I've started to realize that there's quite a correlation. I've talked to them as well, that they're all people that are what I call highly sensitive people, and I'm included within that.
You are.
And quite often they've had some trauma in their life, you know, and we've all had trauma, whether that's big or small. That is life.
Life is a big trauma in itself. But
I've had some real success with one of my friends had awful acid reflux, and it had got to the point where when I met her at the end of last year, she had changed her diet so she couldn't have anything remotely acidic, and she was left being able to basically have chips and a couple of other things. It was awful. It was ruining her life. And I said to her, I'd just like to put it out there that it could be TMS. It could be, you know, Sarno's work. And luckily she was open, and she went, you know what, I do believe in the mind body, and I am a highly sensitive person, and I have had quite a lot of trauma, and I am one of these people that can get quite anxious about the state of the world. She sent me a text message at New Year saying, thank you so much. It's not completely, you know, I haven't completely healed, but it has helped so much that I'm back to a normal life, and I'm work in progress, but it was absolutely the key.
Isn't it really warming the heart to see the victory of the human spirit over the nasty little buggers that come and during life that comes to ruin our health? It's like I see it as almost as a battle between the bad spirits and the human spirit.
Absolutely. I think the other book, actually, that if you're going to mention books, is one called Cured by a guy called Jeff
Redinger. Yeah.
That's it. I thought that was brilliant, and it's more about cancer and spontaneous healing of cancers, but actually a lot of the things that he talks about in terms of looking after the immune system, but also what we think and what we do and our purpose, they're highly related to
Rachel, I again ask you about, you are a very intelligent human being and very analytical, and you are a thinker. So when the doubts, we understand this mechanism of the mind-body connection for sure, and the vagal nerve, polyvagal theory about how we are creating the environment for healing. We are cultivating the terrain for healing, then healing occurs. But still, as thinkers and as people who have been indoctrinated with the linear thinking and the rational thinking, when the doubts came, for example, you would wake up with a symptom of fatigue, and then your spirit would naturally go down. Did you try to catch it on the fly online? And
I mean that's the idea with the lightning process or gut to program or any of those brain retraining, is how do you catch your thoughts as soon as you're aware of the thoughts of I'm never going to heal and this is biomedical, etc. But I mean I call them echoes.
Can you say more about that? Can you describe it? For example, when it happened to you, what was what was going in your mind? What would you answer when these kind of thoughts were coming?
All of the brain retraining processes are sort of similar but different, and essentially along the lines of stop. Just asking yourself to stop. And so I ended up kind of having an amalgamation of various processes that was something along the lines of, come on, Rachel, stop. You've got a choice here. You've come so far. You know this is the right way. You know this is just beliefs kind of slipping in and doubts. You can do this. You've got a choice. And I think in my head, I figured that there was an angel and the devil on my shoulders, and I could go one way or the other. And I was sure as hell not going, but it's hard. I wrote a blog that I call Echoes, and essentially I did the lightning process. I healed. I sent a message to a big Facebook group about how it had helped me. I got mostly positive comments, but I got some very negative comments as well, of people going, wait for the crash, it will be worse than the last one. And the doubt must have come in. because after about a week, I felt the same fatigue coming back. And I thought, it hasn't worked. Why did I do it? And I rang my mom and just went, I've got it all wrong. It's not worked. And then I rang my lightning process coach. She was on holiday. She rang me back and I said, it's not worked, Fiona. And she went, listen to those beliefs. And she knew that I'd done NLP. And I went, oh yes, I've let some doubters in and I've let those thoughts back in, haven't I? And as soon as she said that, the fatigue started to shift and I realized that it was going to be all okay. And that I just let the doubt.
What are people, what are the secondary gains? What do we gain, the hidden gains from, like these people who were fighting you back and were angry about your ideas, your so-called positive ideas?
Yeah.
What do they get of choosing to stay stuck in? And
well, I don't know. I guess it's just beliefs, isn't it? So I have my beliefs, but beliefs are just what show up to be true for each person. So I guess that's just what they believe. And who am I to argue? It's not my truth. So all I can do is tell my truth. That said, I heard about secondary gains when you've got chronic illness. And I thought, no, I don't understand that. But actually now looking back, I look back really fondly to that month off. It was quite nice. I had no responsibility. I didn't have to do the school run. I didn't have to work. I could just do my own thing. There was no pressure. And I think if I'd have had 6 months off, which I did think about doing at one point, I had to force myself to slowly go back to work. If I'd have had more time off, I think that would have got more and more stressful to go back to work. And just the fear of going back, I think, could actually have got me more and more stuck. And so I think, I can see how there could be a gain in terms of not, maybe unconsciously, fear, really, a fear of kind of having to then go back to this stressful life. I don't know.
So in the lightning process and also in NLP, there is a huge weight on language. And this would be my last question to you. And now I ask you as an expert, and also as a person who have been there, done that, a person who healed of a chronic condition, which is considered incurable. Can you say something about the power of language? How do you see it from your own perspective as someone who healed?
Yeah,
I think language, the power of words, and
yeah. I call it priming. Everything you're exposed to actually does make a difference, doesn't it? So if you're talking to people and everyone's saying you're never going to get better or it's going to take you years, that makes a difference. And so I realized that I'd been saying to people when they said, how are you? I've been saying, oh, it's been really hard. It's going to take me a couple of years. And then I started to realize that, what was I feeding myself? So I stopped doing that. I stopped exposing myself to the narratives that I didn't want and only listened to people I knew that had the narrative that I wanted to follow.
So how did you answer them?
So I started just saying to people, I'm getting better. That was it. And we're in the middle of a pandemic, so I wasn't seeing that many people. And I at one point I remember this friend who I used to cycle with saying, how are you? And I wrote the email, and the email was the text, was I'm getting better, but it's going to take me years. And I thought, no, I'm doing it again. So I deleted that it's going to take me years and just went, I'm getting better. And just sent it, and she said, great, I'm glad you're getting better. And I left it at that. And then I realized that if I didn't talk about the condition all the time, and I started to just re-engage with life and other things, and didn't even mention the word long COVID, all of those things mattered as well. And I remember watching a comedy. I never watch comedy. I'm a serious person. And I actually re-watched Simon Pegg's the Cornetto trilogies. And they're silly, they're ridiculous, but I found myself laughing for the first time in months. and realized that actually in that whole an hour and a half, I think it was maybe it wasn't the Cornetto trilogy, I think it was Paul, it was about an alien. It was ridiculous, but I started laughing, and then I realized in that hour and a half I hadn't mentioned long COVID, hadn't thought about it, and I felt great. I went camping for a weekend, and this is what I see a lot with chronic conditions. When people go to a different place that they're not associating with being ill, and there's no stress because they're just on holiday in a new location, often people feel better.
Wow.
You know, what's that about? I've seen it a lot.
I meant when I said the language, yes, so there is the outer language that you talk with others, but
sorry, I'm not answering your question, am I?
no, it's brilliant. I'm talking about the inner language that we use our thoughts. So can you say, not really as an expert now, can you say something about the talk, the words that we use in our, because we think in words. Language is the material of which our thoughts and feelings are made of. So can you say something about it? What's your take?
I mean, I think you have to train yourself, and you have to do it deliberately to begin with, and then you start to actually get into that. So I actually bought a gratitude diary, and every day I wrote 3 affirmations and 3 things that had gone well. And I forced myself to do that every day for months. And after a while, you start looking for those things that have gone well. And every day I wrote in the bottom of the diary, I'm getting better. And whenever, you know, and then when people were asking me, I was starting to say, I'm getting better and I'm going to be well, and I'm now starting to work again. And yeah, so it doesn't come naturally, does it? When you've been really ill and you've been in a really dark place, and all you're saying is, you know, is this it? Have I lost my life? Am I going to be chronically ill for forever? And that's what you're hearing. I think you have to make a conscious choice to begin with, that you're going to turn around the narrative. And I think that starts with, you know, consciously thinking about what you say to yourself. So every day I said, I'm on an upward trajectory. And my partner, very early on, I nearly thumped him at the time. He said, Rach, I think what's going to help you is being positive. I nearly thumped him, because when you're in the pit, you don't want to hear that. But he was right, that mindset piece, finding the gift, finding the positive, reminding myself of the small steps, actually was the thing that added up.
Yeah, wow. Yes, it makes sense. Everything that you said, I really related to, and including the comedy thing that distracted you from the pen, which showed you that it is starting from here. And I am really intrigued about many other things that you mentioned, especially the purple toes. And
I know, the purple toes. The first time they scared me, and actually the next time I was just like, oh well, that's my nervous system. Again.
The Raynaud syndrome, you know Raynaud?
Yeah.
Did you have it before? Did you have an inclination to cold hands and feet before?
No, not really. No, I mean, a little bit, but I cycle in winter and I ski, so a little bit, but not enough to put me off. No, but very definitely I would wear these really thick socks, and still my feet would be really cold. Feet particularly, really freezing. Little toes particularly.
You explained it by feeling anxious, that the anxiety made it. How did you relate to it?
I think it's just stress. It's just inflammation, isn't it? And our nervous system controls everything.
I am clinging to this because when we are talking about chronic fatigue and extreme tiredness, this is something that is not very tangible, even to yourself. But when you look at your fingers and toes and you see them changing the color, like this is involving the senses, the immediate senses.
Yeah.
How would you react to them? How did you
Yeah.
respond to this?
I think I just went, there you go, that's the mind body. It's real, isn't it? But I assumed that my body still thought it was fighting a virus. It was still in fight or flight, and it was going to take some time to get out of that. And even when I did the lightning process, I said, I can still feel my back burning and my throat. And the coach went, yeah, you will for a while, but it will gradually fade if you're not thinking about it. And now that you're out of this fear mode and you understand that you don't need to pace, you've got as much energy as anyone else. It's just that you've been stuck in this narrative that's so strong. Once you're out of that and you realize it will fade, and it did. It just over a period of another month, it just faded because I wasn't worried about it or thinking about it. I sort of just understood.
Dr. Sarno, and you mentioned the lightning process as two modalities that helped you through this time. Do you see they are very related? No? Do you see similarities?
There's huge amounts of relation. I think the lightning process probably had the biggest impact because I had a coach, because I had someone that was very experienced that took me through 3 days of material, so I could talk and she could show me my blind spots. And I think, so it's like someone explained to me, it's like otherwise having therapy without the therapist. And you can go so far, but you're still surrounded by your own blind spots. And one of my blind spots was that I had this fear of exercise. I'd been told by so many people I had to pace and I had to count exactly how many steps I'd done each day, that I was so fearful that if I even went, I did a mile the week before the lightning process and had the worst anxiety attack because I'd only intended to do 0.95. The worst, which then fed into symptoms. And what the lightning process did was I had this actual real life person telling me, Rachel, you're well. You don't need to pace. Forget all the narratives. You've got as much energy as you want. You'll just keep flipping your switch because of the fear, because you're so fearful of overdoing it that you're then flipping that switch. That's the only reason.
This is what your coach told you?
This is what the lightning process coach told me. She didn't press me then, she just told me that. And I was like, immediately I could feel everything lift, where I realized that.
Why do you think these methods work so quickly?
Because it changes your beliefs. So what she did in that moment, I nearly fell off my chair, is it changes your beliefs. So I suddenly realized that this pacing, which can feel very real, so if you crash after you've done more than you thought you should, then you start to believe that you shouldn't have done it, and you set up these cycles. And so all she did in that moment was said, Rachel, you don't need to pace. You've got as much energy as you want. Forget the spoons theory. That's not true. That's just what people believe is true. And when you believe things enough, they become real. She said, you don't need to do that. You've got enough energy. You're just in fight or flight. And because of my NLP, because of Sarno's work, because of Sachs's work, everything else, it all just suddenly all fell into place. And I went, you are right. And I went out and I ran 5K that week because I believed it so much. Wow. And nothing bad happened.
Yeah, of course not.
Nothing happened until a few days later when someone said, wait for the crash. Oh. And then I had the worst anxiety, but I realized it wasn't the run. It was the narrative that I'd let slip in. And so I had to work on the anxiety. But once I did that, I was fine.
So in the lightning process, do they put attention on these stopping these kind of narratives, not allowing contaminations of the thoughts to enter and to.
It's all about noticing your thoughts and noticing the negative thoughts and realizing that if you've got negative thoughts associated with a particular activity, you start to wire those thoughts to that activity. They call it nerves that are fired together, wire together. So if you haven't felt joy for a long time, it's really hard to feel joy. So you have to kind of train yourself that, every time I pick up the call to my lightning process coach, the first thing she said is, Rachel, tell me what's gone well. And I'm like, but I don't want to talk to you about that. And she's like, what's gone well? We always start with what's gone well. And she's right. Then you start doing that and you realize how far you've come. And then you have the conversation. So it's starting to retrain your thoughts in terms of joy again, joy and positive emotions that you might not have felt for a while.
It seems that the lightning process is very structured, very like, first of all, it's very quick, as you testify, and also.
Yeah. But for me, it was quick because I'd done so much work, so much groundwork, and I fundamentally believed it and went out and proved it to myself. But no one forced me to do that. I've seen other people where it's been less quick. And I've seen some people where they've gone, oh, it sort of worked, but I'm still sat on the sofa. And I'm like, you're missing the point. You at some point have to do the thing that you fear, which means you have to get behind your beliefs, and it works at the belief process. That's the thing. So for me, it was quick. I've spoken to other people that they've got better, but they've got better more slowly. So it's certainly not a miracle cure. It certainly takes the commitment of understanding, the language and the things you say to yourself and the self-talk and catching the thoughts.
But without the stress around it, without making it a homework, as you said.
Without making it homework. So I didn't even follow the process 100%. Some people are like, am I doing it right? I'm like, I don't know. I made my own version up. One that worked for me. So without that sort of stress and pressure, yeah.
It's brilliant, Phil Parker, isn't he? With the
Yeah, I really like him. He wrote a book and it describes the whole lightning process, like literally word for word, and it's called Get the Life You Want Now, or Live the Life You Want Now. And it's the whole program. But the difference is you don't have a coach. And for me, having that coach, not just on the 3 days, but access to that coach. She actually came to see me run the other day. I met her in person, which is amazing. Okay. Fiona Finch was my coach. She works in the UK though. There'll be different coaches around the world. I can find out in Israel. I don't know if there are coaches there.
Oh, no.
But the actual book, the Get the Life You Love Now, Live the Life You Love Now, you'll be able to find it. By Phil Parker, explains 100% the whole course material. It's just that for me, I needed the blind spots shown by a coach to work through my individual situation.
Yes, he has been interviewed here, and I personally like him very much. I think he's a brilliant guy and very humble too. So, Rachel, thank you so much for.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I really enjoyed and appreciated your vulnerability and being so human, so raw, so unedited, so unedited version of yourself, which is beautiful. Thank you so much.
You can tell it wasn't planned. It's probably better actually if it was scripted, but I do go off at tangents.
No, we were flowing like health should be, flowing without.
Exactly. And the Curable app is another app that people talk a lot about for chronic condition. I hear a lot of good things about that and people that have healed from that. So it's all out there. It's just trying to find it and away from Western medicine.
And I think that, as you said before, there is tons of good stuff and tools and methods, but the issue is your inner belief.
Yeah.
And what is blocking you from believing it, and this is not an easy question to answer because people who have been traumatized and and they cannot fake it till it's very understood, and I don't think they should be hard on themselves because this is their cycle, at least currently.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just in terms of long COVID, the amount of people I've seen that had some significant events in the year before they caught COVID, you know, a loss of a parent, for instance, you know, or that they had something in their childhood. I'm hearing, you know, similar stories in terms of, as you say, you know, some really significant trauma.
And it can be a positive stress too. Like you said, you were exercising, you were very active.
Yep.
You were jumping between works and jobs, and you were a Wonder Woman, and and doing. They call it type T, the type TMS. You were doing everything for everybody, and you thought that you are contributing to your health. And
yeah, exactly. And I've met lots of people like me that say, you know, I was fitter than I've ever been. And you realize that fitness isn't about training for a marathon and training hard every day. That's not actually
a lot to athletes, to dancers, even to yoga teachers, that they crash out of the blue. The body cannot take it anymore.
Yeah.
So
thank you so much. So I don't know if you want to stop record or what will you what